Hello everyone and welcome to All Things Watched. In this video we are going to talk about part 5 of season 4 of True Detective, also known as Night Country, and episode 5 is simply titled Part 5, and we get a lot of great information in this episode. Some of our theories have been confirmed and some of my theories might change a little bit going into the finale, so we'll have to wait and see what happens in the finale, of course, but we'll talk about all that as we do our scene by scene breakdown. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. I will say real quick, if you're interested in actually watching the entire series with me, you can do so over on our Patreon. And with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. So this episode actually opens with death, and the episode also ends with death. So it opens with death because it opens with this person here who's working at this crematorium, and honestly, they actually go into quite a bit of detail of how a cremation actually works, and we see this worker scooping out the ashes, and they quickly, show us a quick flash as to who it is, and of course, it is Julia Navarro, who is, of course, Evangeline Navarro's sister, and then, of course, they show Evangeline here picking up the ashes, and when excuse me, when the crematorium actually ends up giving her the ashes, he actually, or the person actually tells her to be careful because the urn is still hot or warm. And I actually didn't know that in real life. I didn't realize that they would literally hand the ashes over right away like that. So that was kind of news to me. So it was really interesting to see it. But either way, it was an absolute devastating scene because you can just you just know how maybe to some degree even how guilty Navarro feels for her sister Julia. But either way, that's how this episode opens. And like I said, this episode is opens in death and then ends with death, and that's how it opens with death with the crematorium. And so then we go to Danvers, and Danvers now is actually over speaking. Excuse me. She's actually speaking to Otis Hayes, and she realizes that he's a drug addict and whatnot, and she's trying to get information out of him to try to figure out a little bit more about the Annie K case, and also I think a little bit to find out if she can try to trace down and figure out where Clark is for sure. And she does get a little bit of information here in the sense that he tells her that Clark has sort of been hiding out in the night country, which we do know are caves, and so we learn in this episode that there is a way for them to go into the caves eventually, but we'll get to that when we get there. But either way, she questions him very early on. And of course, this changes as well as the episode goes on because eventually she will take him out and bring him to her own house. So the visit is not totally useless. She does get a little bit of information from him, but still not quite as much as she would like. Eventually she'll bribe him and whatnot. So, anyways, while she's actually leaving, and as she's leaving, he grabs her arm and he basically asks her to help him get well and whatnot. So he basically just shows her where the entrance of the tunnels are of the caves on the map, and then but then he asks her, to help him get well, and of course, why wouldn't he, right? And so she ends up leaving, and Navarro's is here ready to pick her up, and so she explains to Navarro's that that there's this cave system and whatnot, and that or sorry, that she knows where the entrance of the cave is, sorry, and that it basically kind of fills her in. And she does, she is kind of nice here as well because she does have a little bit of sympathy for Navarro because she looks back and she sees in the back seat that Navarro has the urn full of ashes, and so she's very concerned about Navarro, despite the fact that they have this almost a very complicated, almost I won't go as far as saying hateful relationship, but you know what I'm saying. It's like they have a lot of respect for each other, but they also kind of resent each other a little bit. And I think the reason for that is because, something that we have theorized in an earlier episode actually gets confirmed in this episode, and it's about the case that they worked on in the past, where, if you can remember, we talked about maybe how we thought maybe Navarro ended up shooting that person, but anyways, we'll get there when the scene comes, but, so there's just, they have a really interesting relationship, and so in the meantime, Peter goes back home to his girlfriend, or wife, or whatever you want to call it, and she actually ends up kicking him out, and we end up seeing here that Peter ends up saying it's my family too. And I think he feels a little bit guilty. He doesn't, or not guilty, I'm sorry, but I think he might feel a little bit betrayed, and maybe even feels like his girlfriend is being a little bit harsh on him, considering that, he's only really been working this case for a little over a week and whatnot. But, either way, she ends up kicking him out, and basically already has his bags packed. And so we end up coming back to Leah now, which of course is Liz's stepdaughter. And as you can see, she has the paint on her face, and she's really starting to resemble, and her story is really starting to resemble and even parallel Anna Kay, which is of course what Liz was afraid of to begin with. That's really why she's trying to sort of prevent Leah from going down this route. She's trying to stop her from protesting. She's trying to stop her from, doing too much investigation in general, because she doesn't want her to end up like Annie K, because she really reminds Danvers of Annie K, and so she's really just trying to protect her. And I think that this episode had some really good character development, or more so relationship development, between Leah and Liz. I think this episode, I think they end in a really good spot in this episode. So we end up going back to Liz and Navarro's, and they go to the entrance now of the caves, which was shown by Otis. From that visit that Danvers just had with Otis, he ends up showing her where the entrance of the cave is, and they go there, and as you can see, the cave is collapsed. So right off the bat, this is very suspicious. Obviously, there's something being hidden here. They're trying to figure out, they're trying to go here to figure out what happened with Annie K, which I will talk about at the after the scene by scene breakthrough. I will talk about some theories as to where I think the case will go in the finale and whatnot. But either way, they go there. Now, what they don't realize, which we learn later on in the episode, is that there's actually a security camera here, and so they're actually being monitored or recorded. They just don't know it yet. So we end up going back to Peter now, and he is actually just outside of his father's house, Hank, and we learned that Hank is a really good guitar player here, and he actually plays really well. He's not even that bad of a singer, and so the reason why Peter is here, of course, is because he wants to stay here. He needs a place to stay. His girlfriend just kicked him out, and so he ends up calling his father and saying, "Hey, I need a place to stay. Would you mind if I crash with you just for a little while?" And you can tell there's a little bit of awkwardness there. Not really a whole lot of hostility, but more so awkwardness. But Hank obviously agrees to it and whatnot. This is something that we have been predicting literally right from the very first or second episode. We've been saying for a long time that we felt like Peter would end up having to choose between the job and his family, and he would undoubtedly choose the job. And so then we go back to Leah, and then it shows Leah and her friend, approaching this protest, and they have, the marks on their face and whatnot, a lot like what Annie K did. And of course, while they get to this protest, the protest ends up getting very violent, and so the police ends up having to be called. And one of the police that is called, of course, is Navarro, because remember, Navarro is not as high of a rank as what Danvers is, because she was demoted to being a trooper, and because she's a trooper, that means now that she's sort of a part of the SWAT team. So she's a part of this convoy on their way to sort of settle the dispute between the security, the workers, and of course the people protesting the mines. And it's a good thing that she is there, because she ends up really helping Leah, which we'll see in a few minutes. And so we end up going back to Hank, and this is where Hank actually gets the phone call from Peter, who is actually only just outside his house. And this is when he answers, and and Peter asks for permission to stay there. And so Hank got a lot of stuff going on as well. He's still probably really broken up from Alina, sort of standing him up at the airport and whatnot. But either way, he there's no hesitancy, there's no reluctancy or anything. He completely agrees for Peter to stay with him, and he even kind of jokes about it a little bit. He's kind of like, this ain't a 5-star hotel, but you're certainly more than welcome. What I have is yours, type thing. And so I thought that was a really nice little bit of relationship development between them as well, especially with where the story ends by the end of this episode. That whole relationship just does a complete 180 turn on its own. And so we end up coming back to the protests now. And we see Navarro. She's done up in the SWAT gear, and she ends up getting out, and she ends up going into the crowd. And as soon as she gets out and she starts walking through the crowds, as you can see all the protesters behind her, she actually ends up seeing Annie K. I believe this is Annie K. Yes, as you can see the lines on her chin and whatnot. And so once again, you can sort of feel like this is her subconscious, sort of picking up. She always had feelings for Annie K. She always feels guilty for Annie K. This is sort of where the story began for Annie K, because she was Anna K, because she was a protester as well and whatnot. And so then this almost like it parallels, and then we see Leah, and as you can see, there's a security guard here who actually hits her and actually starts choking her. And of course, Navarro does not hesitate even for a second. She springs right into action, and you can tell just from her face that she is not happy. She is going to put this security guard in his place, and she absolutely does. She like lays him right out cold sticker and whatnot, and but like I said, it's a good thing she was there, because because this Leah would have been in a lot of trouble if she wasn't there, because maybe nobody would have helped her, which also showed Leah a lot about her best friend. Her best friend just left her there to be beaten. She cried out for help and she just walked away. But I think something else that this does, this was very important, I think, for Liz and Leah's relationship, because here Leah actually sees Navarro fighting against the protest as a cop, protecting someone who's in the protest, while at the same time fighting against the mind, trying to keep the peace and whatnot. And I think that this was really important, because I think now this really makes Leah realize why Danvers doesn't want her to be at these protests, and I think she realizes how serious it is. And Navarro is even a little bit strict with her right here, which I think was very important. So all this sort of chaos and Navarro being here, having to actually step in and protect Leah, I think this was a really good jump forward for the relationship between Leah and her mother or stepmother, because I don't know that she would have felt as willingly or as open to having a good relationship with her mom if somebody else had have jumped in. I think the fact that it was Navarro that helps her, I think that was actually what sort of kickstarted their relationship later on in this series, because they do start to get a little bit closer by the end of this episode, her and Liz. And so we end up going back to Liz now, and so it goes back to Liz, and Liz now gets the phone call that that Navarro's has Leah, and that she was at the protest, and that she was. I don't know if she tells her. I can't remember if she actually tells her on this phone call that she was assaulted. And attacked, but she does tell her that she was at the protest, and that now she has her and she's bringing her in, and Liz is like, okay, bring her in and book her. Now when you first hear this, you're probably thinking, well, this might be a little bit harsh. Her own mother is going to book her and potentially even charge her, but I think, at the end of the day, she's only doing this to try to protect her the best that she can. So in the meantime, right after she has this conversation, Peter ends up bringing her a whole bunch of information all about the mine, and also the research facility. And what we learn here is we learn that the two of them are actually working cooperatively, because the mine is polluting the town's water and really causing a bunch of chaos in the town, a lot of sickness, a lot of people dying because of the pollution, which is the whole reason why the protests are here to begin with. But then that facility, the research facility company, they're working with the mines because they're the ones doing the tests on the water, and they're lying about the pollution levels and saying that the water is actually drinkable. And so this is, really important information to the case, because now we can see that there's almost like somewhat of a conspiracy going on here in the town between the mine and the research facility, and it also means that they are connected now, which could be something that Anna Kay ended up finding in the previous time. Maybe there's something in the cave that proves that. Maybe like there's a section in the cave where you can see all the pollution or something like that, or all the animals dying in the ice. I don't really know what the connection is there yet, but I have a couple theories of what I think might have happened there. But anyways, we'll keep going. And so here we end up seeing Leah in jail now, because as we know, Liz decided to actually book her, and something really strange happens here, because Peter ends up offering her, something to eat and something to drink. He gives her a soda and a bag of chips. But the reason why I thought that this was very strange is because then he proceeds to actually hold her hand, so to speak, and I kind of said all the way back in the very first episode when we did our episode 1 review that this is a really strange relationship. Like, they're really close, but there's such a big age gap. Like, there's something really strange going on here, and he's like basically holding her hand here. And so this made me wonder if maybe Peter could actually be a really big suspect in the Anna Kay case, because there's never really anything alluding to him doing it, which makes me feel like he's even more guilty. It's kind of like there's so much evidence not pointing towards him that maybe he is guilty, because they could pull the rug out from under you and say that Peter was the one involved. And given the fact that he's actually here holding onto her hand, makes me wonder if Peter and Anna Kay maybe didn't have an affair or something. I don't know. I mean, I'm really just throwing predicting out of left wing here, out of just right out of the ballpark here. But I'm just saying that it's really weird that he's holding her hand and touching her here to some degree, and I just felt like maybe there's a connection between that and Anna Kay. Maybe there's not. Maybe he's completely innocent and has nothing to do with the case. But I don't know. This fact that he's holding her hand here makes me think, and he's also married to an indigenous woman. Anna Kay was an indigenous woman, so it seems like he sort of gravitates towards indigenous women. So maybe that's his type of women, that's what he's into. And so I just thought that was really strange, which is why I wanted to sort of emphasize on it. Now, in the meantime, Danvers finally ends up getting in, or not Danvers, Navarro ends up coming in, and then Danvers shares that little bit of information to Navarro, explaining to her about the cooperation between the miners and the facility and how they're working together. One is polluting the town, and the other is saying that the pollution levels are normal and that they're not really. So in the real world, they're polluting the town, but on paper, they're not, which allows them to legally continue their operations. So while Danvers is handing all this information over to Navarro, she ends up getting a phone call telling her that she now needs to go and meet with the certain boss, which is Kennelly, and also the person I think who runs the mines or something like that. And this was a really cool scene, because this is where where Danvers actually stands up and sort of pushes back a little bit. She even calls out Kennelly here. And so she's here telling, she stands up to this boss or this owner, CEO, whatever she is, and tells her, hey, don't you think it's a coincidence that, you're polluting the water and the land, and this facility, where all the researchers were actually killed, is convenient how they all died, and they're the ones that are, lying about the numbers and whatnot, and they try to say that all these researchers died from natural causes. It was an avalanche, and basically Danvers just is like, yeah, that's not true. I know it's not true, and basically, just says it like it is. They also reveal here, as you can see, that this is where we know that they were. Danvers and Navarro's was videotaped on, on a camera being here at the entrance of the mine, and that also is very peculiar, because why is there a security camera pointing towards this mine, which is supposed to be abandoned, and now also the entrance is also crushed in? So it's almost like they were keeping an eye on it just to see if anyone would arrive or show up to ask any questions, and of course they did. That was Navarro's and Danvers, and so now Danvers realizes that they're caught on tape, and this could be a problem in the future. And so she ends up standing up to Kennelly and actually says to Kennelly, hey, what happened to, once upon a time you would never, stand for this. You would be up and you would be trying, you'd be all over this, but now you're being a coward, and basically accuses him of being paid off to some degree, or being on their payroll. So it was really nice to see Danvers really step up to him and really basically put him in his place. And so then we get a really interesting scene here, and this is something that actually confirms one of our theories that we had in a previous episode, and that is because here we see Hank, which is Peter's father, and he's meeting with this same boss lady that was just talking to Danvers, and she is telling Hank that he needs to go deal with Otis. He's a drug addict, make it look like he overdosed, basically telling him to go kill Otis because he is a liability. He has too much information, knows too much information, and she knows that Danvers is not going to let this go. So they can't just straight up kill Danvers, so instead let's kill Otis. But of course, Danvers is smarter than this, which we'll talk about later on, and she sort of thinks about this ahead of time. But anyways, it's just really important to see here that Hank is definitely involved with the case, but not he's indirectly. So he didn't actually kill Anna Kay, which we'll learn later on, but he did know about her and he was involved with her, which is actually something that we predicted very early on in one of the previous episodes. I did think that Hank knew about her, or at least was involved, but not necessarily to the point where he took her life. So then we go back to Navarro's, and Navarro's is here, and she's actually at this laundromat trying to do her laundry when somebody ends up walking by and sees her through the window and comes in and actually ends up giving her this rock. And then once he gives her this rock, as you can see, once again, it's the symbol, the same symbol that Rose was talking to her about in previous episodes. And then this gentleman goes on to explain to her that it was actually supposed to be a warning, and that the symbol symbolizes the night country, or the water, or the storm, or something like that. And what it means is that the water or the storm swallows people. So it's just really a symbol of death. It's like a warning that death is coming or something like that. And so he sort of explains all that symbolism to Navarro. And so Navarro ends up going back to Danvers then. And so Navarro goes back to Danvers and actually explains to him, or to her, sorry, what the guy told her about the symbol, what it means, and she also tells Danvers that there is another way into the cave. It's just they need to find like a certain area of the cave. I think they said like a place that's on top of the cave that's very, very thin, so that they can sort of crack their way into it and whatnot. And so she basically, tells Danvers that, they can't stop, because Danvers is basically saying, hey, we were shut down. The case was shut down, taken from us. We need to sort of stop moving forward with this. And then, Navarro's like, no, we can't. And then basically puts Danvers in her spot. She's like, no, I carried Annie Cave all this time. Now you're the one walking away, so now you can carry her. And so this obviously resonates with Danvers quite a bit. And then Navarro actually goes and releases Leah from from prison and lets her out. And I think she does this in the sense of she's trying to sort of send a message to, Danvers to some degree, in the sense of, hey, all this crazy stuff happened to Anna Kay. It could certainly happen to your daughter as well. And I think she's sort of trying to use Leah here more so to, in a way, to make Danvers feel guilty. And it actually works, because she does end up feeling guilty. So now we end up getting a little bit of backstory of Peter, because Hank ends up coming here and talking to Peter, and they end up talking about a memory about something that actually happened a long time ago. And he tells, and Peter says that he doesn't really remember a whole lot about it, but Hank says, well, it explains the story about how when Peter was really young, he ended up falling through the ice, and then he ended up having to actually, dig down through the ice to save his life, which I thought was very interesting, because I don't really know the symbolism of this, or what this might mean for the finale. It might not mean anything because of where Hank ends up at the end of this episode. It could have been just a way for them to sort of have this bonding moment, because I do think that Hank knows that something really bad is going to happen, because they have Hank in that position where they're asking him to deal with Otis. So I don't know if they gave us this flashback just sort of as a way of sort of Hank and Peter having their final farewells, almost like Hank is saying goodbye, or if it will actually play a role in the next episode. I don't really know, but I feel like with where Hank's story ends in this episode, I feel like it's more likely that it was just him saying a goodbye and sort of having that final moment with his son where they're just talking about a memory. And really it's showing how much Peter really cares about Hank. And Hank in this episode repeatedly says blood is blood, sort of almost like he's trying to remind Peter that, we're family and you always stick with blood, because we know by the end of this episode Peter's not going to stick with Hank, he's going to stick with Danvers. And so then we come to this really sad scene, really, with Navarro's, and she's out here with Rose, and Rose is digging down through the ice, because Navarro's wants to actually spread Julia's ashes in the ocean, because basically her attitude is, well, Julia walked out into the sea, which means she desired to be in the sea, and so that's exactly what they do. She opens up the hole in the ice, and then Navarro's pours out the ashes, setting Julia free in the ocean. It was just, and I just wanted to put that in there because it was just such a heartwarming scene, and it was just so sad, and also I think very symbolic maybe to what's going to happen in the future. in the finale, because we've already sort of caught, even in this episode actually, Navarro is caught walking out into the sea. She hallucinates thinking that she's in this different place, and to the point where Rose actually ends up having to save her to some degree. And so we end up coming back to Danvers now, and she's talking to Leah, who is actually in the bathtub. And this is the scene that I was saying earlier about how Danvers and Leah actually has a really great bonding moment here. And in fact, by the time this conversation ends, as Liz is actually leaving, Leah actually tells Liz, "I haven't given up on you yet," and I think this is another motivation for Danvers to sort of keep going with this Annie K and not back down from the authority, because of the fact that Leah has now said, "I haven't given up on you yet." So I think that this was a really great push forward for Danvers, and I think this was a great relationship development, and even character development for both of these characters. They're finally sort of seeing eye to eye. They're not quite there yet, but they're getting there, and I thought that this is very important because I do think that there's a possibility that something could happen to Danvers in the next episode, but I'm not 100% sure. So Danvers ends up going and investigating a whole bunch of these bodies of a whole bunch of people that ended up dying, and they keep them here because in the winter up here in Alaska they obviously can't bury the bodies, so they keep them sort of in this shack which is extremely cold, which will preserve the bodies, because I would assume the bodies are basically frozen at this point. But anyways, Danvers ends up investigating it, and she ends up finding some clues, so she goes back to the station. And what's really interesting is that this is the first time that she starts to notice now that Hank is actually following her, and now she's actually onto him. Remember, Danvers is not an idiot, but we also learned that Hank is not an idiot either. And so once Danvers ends up realizing that Hank is following her, she ends up calling Peter into her office and basically accuses him of telling Hank about the case and whatnot. And he's like, "No, I didn't tell him about anything." And so Danvers actually said a really funny line here. She's like, "Well, Hank is not as stupid as he appears, because he was able to get it into your computer," basically, and tells him, that he must have been able to guess the password or whatnot, because somehow Hank had a bunch of information that nobody else knew, and so that's how she knew that, he hacked into the computer and whatnot, and basically accuses Peter for being careless and that he needs to be a little more careful. And then we have a really cool back and forth, and we find out the truth about everything that happened to Navarro and Danvers in the old case that they were studying. And Peter hauls out the pictures and shows that all these pictures were actually manipulated, because he ends up asking Danvers a whole bunch of questions, which I actually really liked, because that's actually Danvers' style in investigating, and that's sort of been a common theme throughout the entire series. In episode 1 and 2, she would oftentimes say, ask the questions. Is the information's here, we just need to ask the right questions. And then in this episode she does like a full circle, and she actually flips and she says, "But there is a time when we need to learn to stop asking questions." And so after Peter shows her all this information, he straight up asks her, because she says, "Peter just asked me the question," and he says, "Did you know that Otis was left-handed?" And she says, or not Otis, but Wheeler, the old suspect, Wheeler, "Did you know that he was left-handed?" And she's like, "No, I didn't know." And then he's like, straight up asks her, "Did you and Navarro stage a murder and make it look like a suicide?" And she just gives him this obviously so obvious smirk, which obviously has guilty marked all over it. She's basically telling him, "Yes, we did set it up as a suicide," and whatnot. And it was just, it was a really big moment for both of these characters, because she finally admitted the truth. We now finally know the truth, and it also shows that she trusts Peter enough with the truth that she trusts that he won't turn her in and whatnot. So that was a really big development in that relationship as well. And then she tells him, that's when she tells him, "You got to learn when to stop asking questions." And so she ends up taking a key off of her key ring, because now he knows that he can't trust staying with Hank, because Hank is obviously clearly not respecting the privacy, going through his laptop and whatnot, so he can't trust living there with Hank. So she gives him the key to her shack, and she's like, "Hey, you can stay with me. You don't need to see me. I don't need to see you. Just, you got to get out of where you're staying." And so Hank ends up going in to speak with Peter, and Peter's just like, no, get out of here, I don't trust you, blah blah blah, basically. And then, they really leave in on bad terms. And I think this was the final straw, which really makes Peter trust Danvers more than Hank now, because of the fact, well, A, Hank went against the privacy and knows that, Peter knows that Hank was investigating him now, or well, not necessarily investigating him, but trying to, figure out what's going on in the investigation. And then, of course, while at the same time Liz was very open and honest with him, so I don't think it was too much of a stretch to believe that Peter would have. I think he would have taken Danvers' side regardless, but this really pushed him over the edge, and he basically lost all respect for his father. And once again, his father sort of keeps, reminding him blood is blood and whatnot. So then Danvers ends up making the smart move. She ends up going to get Otis and brings him home and promises to actually give him drugs, give him more heroin, as long as he agrees to help. And so she ends up bringing him actually to her own house, because she feels that's the only place that she can keep him safe. And so Navarro ends up going back home here, and this is a beautiful scene here between Navarro and the person that she's dating, or the boyfriend, whatever you want to call him. And the reason why this scene was beautiful was, one, this is the most open I feel like they both have been with each other, but then at the same time, this really foreshadows the future, because right before Navarro leaves, he looks at her and says, please come back. And then he says it again a second time, promise me, please come back. So really foreshadowing a potential death here for Navarro, not to mention the fact that she keeps hallucinating and seeing these dead people, which are really emulating her mother. And there's no doubts in our mind that we think that the mother wants Navarro to go with her, basically meaning that the mother wants Navarro to be killed and die, which would then be the third and final thing that Rose said all the way back in the first episode about the dead. They come to visit, they come to give a message, or they come to take you with them. And I think it's pretty obvious now that Navarro's mother is coming to take her with her. So we end up going back to Liz's house, and she gets the information that she needs. Otis ends up pointing out on the map exactly where they can go into the cave and how to get in and where to go in order to break through. And of course, then something happens that even I wasn't really fully expecting. Hank ends up showing up. I was expecting Hank to show up, but I wasn't expecting this whole alteration to go down the way that it did. Because while Hank is there, obviously Danvers is starting to realize really quickly that Kennelly is probably in on it now, so she got to be careful with Kennelly. And she also realizes that Hank is here not only looking for Otis, but he wants to kill Otis because she knows that he knows that Otis is a liability, and so that he's going to have to be dealt with. And so he ends up coming in anyways, because she ends up spilling the beans, so to speak, and says, hey, Otis is here. He ends up pulling out his gun. And as you can see, Danvers is trying to stop him, and he ends up shooting Otis, and Otis actually ends up getting killed, which I did predict. I mean, I think it was pretty obvious that Otis was going to die, but fortunately, he didn't die before giving Liz the information that he needed. Now, on what Hank did not know that Peter was actually living in temporarily staying in Danvers' shed, and Peter comes in with his gun drawn, and he's like, hey Hank, what's going on? And this is when we get the big reveal, which is something that we did predict in the previous episode, that Hank was involved, but he didn't actually kill Annie K, because he actually says out of his own mouth here, he says, I didn't kill Annie K, I just helped move her body. And I'll talk about why I think that's significant later on, and how maybe that could sort of play into Peter as well. But of course, Hank ends up drawing his gun on Danvers, and Peter opens fire, and then Otis and Hank ends up dying here in this episode. So it makes me very excited to see what they'll do for the finale. And so all of them are here huddled around, and they have to come up with a plan, because obviously they can't rely on Kennelly. Kennelly is in on it as well, and so they sort of have to take all this into their own hands. So basically what happens, Peter agrees to clean up they all come together to make a plan, and then Navarro tells Peter, hey, I know what you can do. You clean up everything here while Navarro and Danvers goes to search the caves, and Navarro actually tells Peter, take the bodies to Rose and tell her that you need to take them where Julia is. go where Julia was or is or whatever. Tell Rose to take you to Julia or whatever. And so I thought that was really cool, kind of creepy, but really cool as well. And now the three of them are now once again covering up a murder, because remember, Danvers and Navarro covered up a murder before, but they said it was suicide. Now they're covering for a murder again, and they actually tell Peter, if you take these bodies to where Julia is, you'll never have to worry about these bodies being found. And so Peter starts to clean up, and Navarro's and Danvers ends up driving off into the darkness, which once again is very symbolic, because now they're going into the night country, which this episode also sort of confirms what the night country is. The night country are these caves and whatnot, and so that's where they're going now. That's where they're heading to find out what really went down in these caves. And like we said, we know that. We know that Hank didn't actually kill Annie, but he did say that he moved the body. And so that's basically the scene by scene breakdown and all the huge things that happened in this episode. We had some really big breakthroughs with the case, with the information, with the people involved. Hank obviously is involved. Kennelly is obviously involved. And I'm guessing the research facility must have been involved to some degree, but then the mining company decided to take them out and kill them or whatnot. Or maybe they were threatened. Maybe maybe the research facility people were actually going to tell the truth. Maybe they were going to end up, showing the true readings and showing that the mine was polluting and killing people, so they just eliminated them all and then just blamed it on a natural disaster, an avalanche and whatnot. So you can clearly see that this case is being, swept underneath the rug, so to speak. So my predictions for the finale are these. There's two really big theories that I have now going into the finale, sorry. One, I think that the only reason why I think that Hank had to move the body was simply because Annie K's body was on the property of, I guess, the mines, or the people that own the mines. That's one possibility. It's possible that the mines were not actually involved with Annie K at all. It's possible that she was just killed on their property, and so they asked Hank to move the body just for liability purposes. Now, that's one possibility. So if the mine didn't actually kill her, and Hank was only involved with moving the body, then who would have killed her? Well, I think that one really big suspect moving forward could actually be Peter. We've seen Peter holding on to Leah's hand when he gave her the junk food, and he's obviously has a child and is married to an indigenous woman. It seems to me like Peter has a thing for indigenous women. So there's a possibility that maybe Peter was the one that actually killed Anna Kay. Maybe he was trying to get with her. Maybe he was trying to rape her or something, and something went down, maybe where he ended up getting caught, or she threatened to tell on him, and so he ended up chasing her to the caves and killed her. And so therefore Hank ends up helping clean up the body and moves the body to get it off the property of the mine. Maybe the mines helped cover up for Hank, as long as he helped him in some way or some weird way, shape, or form. Either way, we know for sure that Hank didn't kill Anna Kay, but he knew about it. And so Peter now, for me, is a pretty big suspect. But they could go the other way and say, well, Peter was not involved, and that maybe Anna Kay went into the caves on her own, and she did stumble upon something, because we do know from a previous episode that there were lights inside of the cave, because before Anna Kay died, the lights went out, the same as the research facility, and so until they actually find Clark, we're not really going to know what happened anyways, because I think Clark will be the key to it all. But given the fact that the lights went out, clearly there was a generator there, and clearly there were lights in the cave for some reason. So it is also possible that Anna Kay just happened to stumble upon something. Maybe she just seen something that she wasn't supposed to see. The only thing that I could see that she would have been able to stumble upon that would, be serious enough to actually get her killed would be, I would think that maybe she stumbled upon something in the caves where there was a bunch of dead animals or something like that. We've seen that there was bones in the background and that there were dead animals, which to me could symbolize pollution. Maybe she stumbled on these caves and realized just how much damage the mines were doing. It was polluting, the earth so much that all the animals were dying, so maybe that was the reason why they wanted to kill her. because clearly there was someone here for some reason. Now, I would think that if there was a generator set up there and there were lights, it would probably did have something to do with the research facility, maybe something to do with Clark, who we haven't found yet or actually seen yet really ever since the first episode. And so it's possible that Clark was doing something and she just happened to walk in on Clark, or whatever he was doing and whatnot, because he was really weird and he acted very strange in the first episode as well. So that's a big theory. And then so I think those are my two biggest theories moving forward. I think that either Peter was involved because maybe he was having an affair or something, and he just happened to chase her to the and it's a possibility actually that both theories are true. Maybe Peter did have an affair with Anna Kay, still chased her to the caves, and then when she got to the cave she stumbled upon something, and then Peter still killed her anyways. So we don't really know, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe Peter is completely innocent, and that she just happened to find something that she wasn't supposed to see. But I think those are definitely the two biggest possibilities. I think the only reason why her body was moved was just for the sake of liability. I don't think that it was moved for any other reason other than to take her off the property so that the mines would not be liable for the situation. And so and also it might even be possible that it might have been possible that even that could have been why Hank reached out to the mines. Maybe Hank did tell the mines about what happened, and so they all worked together to basically sweep it under the rug. And so maybe it was the mines that blasted the entrance to shut up the door so nobody could go in there and actually see the evidence and whatnot. I'm very curious to see what kind of evidence they're actually going to find, because it is inside of a cave where everything is frozen, so maybe there will be blood there that's preserved or whatnot. So I'm very curious to see the cave side of things. Clark is very likely in there somewhere, so they're going to have to deal with that. But those are my two biggest theories now moving forward. I'm still not 100% convinced that Rose is involved, but at the same time, I am a little bit convinced, so Rose could still play into this as well somehow. Or I could be completely wrong. In terms of, do I think anybody will die? Well, I think that the whole series was sort of hinting towards Navarro dying, that she's always seeing people, she's constantly thinking that her mother is trying to take her, so I think Navarro could actually die, and I also even could see Danvers dying. I would not be surprised if they both die, I would not be surprised if one dies, and I would not be surprised if both of them survive. So I don't really have a prediction, I guess, for the deaths, because I could see it going either way, but I do think that Navarro has the biggest likelihood of dying, given the fact that it's been hinted at the whole series, and then plus her boyfriend was like, please come back, please come back. So I do think there's a really good chance that Navarro will die, and I think there's like a 50% chance that Danvers could die, or maybe they'll do it in a way where Navarro is about to die, and then Danvers saves her, or something like that, because I think that could be why they sort of cleaned up the relationship a little bit between Danvers and Leah in this episode. And so with that being said, folks, that's my predictions. That's what I think is going to happen for the finale. I really liked this, really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was really good. Lots of great information, lots of great action, and a lot of things happened that I was not expecting. So I really liked this one, and I can't wait to see the finale. So let me know in the comment section below if you've seen this episode, and if you liked it. If you did, click that subscribe button. And until the next one, take care.